It's an hour of inspiration, patriotism, and common sense talk about the greatness of America with your host, Tom Herron. Up with America, right here on Talk 94.5.
All of you could be in the studio with me because you could hear Glenn Dye singing the national anthem. I may just have him do it one morning soon. Aren't those beautiful tunes, beautiful words? I just love that song. And I think we all need to honor it and love it. And I think it's starting to show. Do you see what the NBA apparently has decided they're going to insist on playing it every week?
Well, that was a Mark Cuban.
I know.
I don't want to use profanity on your show, but
I understand.
Yeah. Sometimes rich people are stupid.
That's exactly correct. Oftentimes, I think.
Yeah, oftentimes.
So, everybody, welcome to Up with America Radio. Saturday, what is it? February 13th, isn't it?
That is correct.
That's hard to believe, isn't it?
Yeah.
That means Valentine's Day is tomorrow.
And it's a great day to cuddle up with your sweetie because it's going to rain. 100% chance of rain tomorrow. Today, I mean,
I think it's going to rain here in Myrtle Beach. It's going to snow and ice everywhere else in America.
Hey, thank God we live in Myrtle Beach.
Nightmare weather around the country, I'm telling you what.
And if you're moving to the area from the north, leave your snow shovels at home. We don't need any of that.
Since we're talking about Myrtle Beach just for a minute, the show that precedes me here locally, for those of you who are listening from other states and other areas, and I know there are a lot of you, is called the Saturday Morning Coffee with Reese Boyd. Reese Boyd is a dear friend of mine, and Reese Boyd also happens to be a consultant to Up with America, the 501c4 we started a few years ago. The guy had a fantastic show this morning, so let me implore you to do something. If you're not in Myrtle Beach, go to the website, go to talk945.com at 7 a.m. on Saturday mornings and listen to a fantastic show. He spent most of this morning, he had a couple of guests on, but he spent most of this morning discussing the whole problem with the Convention of States and the incredible need we have to get the states back involved in the way this country is run.
Right.
And especially to get term limits. And you all, if you're following this show, I've already had the head of Term Limits USA on. I got into a war yesterday, Glenn, Facebook war, which I try to avoid, with a couple of Facebook friends of mine, so-called friends, who just don't get it. They think the Convention of States is going to end up with a new convention and communism and all this other stuff. It doesn't work that way. Nothing actually happens there except whatever they decide goes back to the states to decide. And we're never going to get some of these things unless we have that happen. That's all there is to it. So anyway, bottom line is this has been a heck of a week, hasn't it?
It has been a heck of a week.
I mean, I have to admit something. I cannot be glued to that stuff. It was just absolutely nonstop nonsense frankly, on both sides, I thought. This country has huge problems, and instead of solving them and addressing them, like throughout our entire lives, what we've been used to is Democrats have a position on something, Republicans have a position, and so do independents. And then they sit down in a room together and decide how to prioritize things. We're not even listing the same things anymore. You can't prioritize issues when nobody even agrees on what they are. So what's been happening is just a complete disaster, in my humble opinion.
Well, and our kids are growing up, learning like they learn in China. You don't talk back. You don't have an opinion. You just follow the rule of law, and you don't talk against the establishment. And I think that's ridiculous.
That is ridiculous, Glenn. That is exactly the problem. And at the core of that problem is that God is missing from our lives.
Exactly.
Anybody who understands the foundation of this country has to understand that divine intervention took place. Those guys, for all those guys to be here and write those documents and believe those things, that was divine intervention.
Yeah.
And God is at the foundation. If you read the words, God is at the foundation of everything here.
Yep.
So what we're going to do just for a minute, I think I've got a special prayer for the United States.
You do?
I want you all to hear this. This is really a cool prayer. And then after that, we're going to have maybe a brief break. And then we have a fantastic special guest on this morning, Hans von Spakovsky from the Heritage Foundation, because we need to all of us need to understand here in South Carolina and in every state that if we don't fix our election procedures, our voting procedures, and I mean now, so that it happens for 2022, we've lost the country. That's the number one priority for Up With America Radio and for our organization. So let's take a moment and say a prayer for this country.
Lord God, I ask in all humility that you bless this country as unworthy as we are. Protect it from every evil. Protect it from the enemy. Protect it, Lord, that it may accomplish thy will and keep thy commandments. I ask, Lord, with a pleading heart, to look down upon us in our unworthiness. Give this country a renewal of devotion to you, to your law, to your commandments, Lord. Let us be once more a country under you, Lord. Maybe once more saying, God we trust. Guide us and protect this country from every evil and every harm. Amen.
It's Up With America with your host, Tom Herron, right here on Talk 94.5.
The only local conservative morning show on the Grand Strand. The Liz Calloway Show with Nick Summers. 6 to 10. Weekday mornings on Talk 94.5.
Well, I got down on my knees and I pretend to pray. You know the preacher like to call.
You know what? There were many years that I was California dreaming. That place has turned into such a nightmare. Maybe I'm more like Florida dreaming or Key West dreaming.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a mess out there. Listen, you know what, folks? One of the great honors of being the host of this show is that because it's national in nature and because we talk about the biggest issues, we get to speak with and hear from some of the greatest experts in the land about some of these issues. With us on the line today in just a minute, I will introduce to you Hans von Spakovsky, who is manager of Election Law Reform Initiative and a senior fellow at the Meese Center for Legal and Judicial Studies. Hans is an authority on a wide range of issues, including civil rights, civil justice, the First Amendment, and immigration. So, look, as we know, based on what happened back in November, we simply, doesn't even matter whether you believe there was a problem. The truth of it is that we went for months not knowing what's really going on. We can simply never let that happen again. So, Hans, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being with us this morning on a Saturday morning. What's the weather like in Washington?
Well, I hate to tell you, but it's icing up here already. I actually went out this morning to fill up my gas tank with my car, and by the time I was coming back, my windshield was caked with ice.
I lived there most of my life in Northern Virginia, graduated from high school over in Montgomery County. I don't miss it. I don't miss the weather. I miss the place. I don't miss the weather one bit.
Yeah, I understand that very well. I've been to Myrtle Beach, and you're living in a gorgeous part of the country.
We certainly are, although it's not real nice right now. It's not a whole lot better. The difference is it's gray and rainy, and that's the forecast that started a week ago and apparently is going to go on for another couple of weeks. Well, Hans, again, welcome to the show. Tell me, if you wouldn't mind, started out, how did you get involved in all this stuff? What made you become involved with the Heritage Foundation? And then let's get into the real details and nitty-gritty about election reform.
Well, I'll tell you, in the early 1990s, I was just a lawyer practicing down in Atlanta, Georgia, and I was persuaded to be a poll watcher in a local election, and I showed up. I was a poll watcher in one of the housing projects in Atlanta, and I saw something illegal going on in the polling place. I couldn't believe it. It was a general election where when you go up to the registration desk and give them your name and all that, they're just supposed to check you in and then hand you a ballot. The folks at this overwhelmingly Democratic precinct at the registration desk, before they would hand people a ballot, they were asking them, well, which political party are you in?
Oh, come on.
And it was clearly an attempt to intimidate the few people in that particular precinct who were Republicans and were voting Republican. And boy, I was just shocked that something like that was happening in America. And that got me into elections. It led to me being appointed to the Fulton County Election Board, which was the board that ran elections in Fulton County, which, as you know, covers metropolitan Atlanta. So that was the beginning of the path, and I ended up working at the Justice Department on voting issues, and I was at the Federal Election Commission. When I left the government, I went to the Heritage Foundation, which, as you know, is probably the leading conservative think tank in the world.
Well, interesting, by the way, I won't spend more than a second. I also served on the Election Commission Board right here in our county. We tried to make a bunch of changes about 15 years ago and got pretty much nowhere with it, including problems we were having with our election machines, which we discovered are supposed to be kept in a climate-controlled place, and they were not. And then they'd be delivered to the schools, and they were supposed to be independent from one another, and they're not. It turns out there's some kind of a system that hooks them up together on the internet. So, but in any event, listen, you've got a great background. You're working with a great organization. If you don't mind, take a second and tell us what you think may have gone wrong. By the way, what Hans just talked about with his first experience is much more typical of the problems with voting, I think, in America than what we think may have happened back in November. But if you don't mind, tell us how you feel about what took place there and what we can do to prevent that from ever happening again, my friend.
We don't know what happened in the last election because despite all the lawsuits that were filed and despite all the affidavits, for example, that were filed by witnesses and poll watchers and others who said they saw all kinds of illegal behavior or errors and irregularities, I'm not aware that a single one of those cases ever got to the evidentiary stage. In other words, the stage where witnesses are actually brought into court, their substantive allegations are examined. In fact, every one of those cases was dismissed on procedural grounds. The judges saying, well, we're not going to look at this because you don't have standing to bring a lawsuit. Or like in the Pennsylvania case where it was dismissed on the doctrine of laches, which is this legal doctrine saying, well, you can't wait too long to assert your right. So we're never really going to know because there's been no in-depth investigation conducted in any state to try to figure out the truth or the credibility of the claims being made. What I suspect may have happened is that I think a lot of the legislative legal requirements were just waived by election officials. And I think that's why, for example, GOP observers were locked out in places like Philadelphia, in places like Fulton County, Georgia, because I think what was happening was probably absentee ballots were coming in, and rather than doing what you're supposed to do with those, which is you're supposed to verify and check them, it's a signature match. Has the voter correctly filled it out? I think they were just opening the ballots and counting them and not bothering to do that. But we'll never know because it hadn't been investigated.
We will never know. Isn't that just tragic? However, here's what we do know. We can never go through this again. One more thing before you get into it, because I want you to talk about some of your recommendations. One more thing is that there's a lot of speculation. I mean, I've never lived in an era in my life where there's conspiracy theories abound. I mean, I can go on the internet every day, go to YouTube or Facebook or somewhere and watch a pretty well-produced film or video from somebody that seems very convincing that some company based in Belarus, is responsible for screwing with our election machines. I don't particularly buy that. I think most of the problems with our elections are exactly as you have described. It can easily be done on a very local basis by people who are just either ignorant or have the intent of trying to screw things up.
Oh, I agree with you completely.
Okay, good.
Look, despite what everybody wants to believe, I don't think that any real credible evidence has been brought forward about the machines or the software and the hardware. On the other hand, we know for certain the kind of problems that occur on a local level. You know this because you are on a local election board. And let me just give you a very quick example of this. Okay, just prior to last year's election, another organization I'm on the board of called the Public Interest Legal Foundation released a report. It's called Critical Condition, and I urge people to go to their website and take a look at it. We got hold of the voter registration list from 42 states. We then compared the data, and guess what we found? We found that in the 2016 and 2018 federal elections, there were over 144,000 potential cases of voter fraud. Things like we found 14,000 people who are registered in 2 different states and so voted in both states. We found thousands of people who are registered at commercial addresses, not a residential address, which is a requirement of every state, but at commercial addresses. In Nevada, we found people registered at casinos, at pawn shops, in vacant lots, okay? That tells you the potential size of the problem, but it also illustrates part of the problem, which is voter registration lists that are in such poor shape that it's easy to commit fraud. Look, we put that report out. Not a single law enforcement official anywhere in the country and not a single election official has contacted the Public Interest Legal Foundation saying, you found all these people who are registered in 2 different states and voted illegally in 2 different states. Send us the information on the voters in our state that you found to do that so we can investigate. And nobody's bothered to do that.
That's what I was going to ask you, Hans. This is Glenn Dye. And that was, fraud is fraud. Why are we not following up on the fraudulent people that voted twice, voted in different states, rounding them up, charging them, and making examples of them so that in the future people tend to not commit fraud?
Well, one of the problems is that very few prosecutors are interested in pursuing these cases. And again, I'll give you another example of this. The Secretary of State of Alabama is a really good guy. His name's John Merrill. And he has told me how his office has uncovered all these potential cases of voter fraud in Alabama, and yet when he sends them to local prosecutors to pursue, they don't do it.
Then they need to lose their jobs because this is our democracy. This is the future of our country, and it's being ignored.
I agree.
It's being swept under the rug.
I agree. And I think in some instances, it's prosecutors, they're dealing with rapes and murders and burglaries, and they just don't think it's important, which of course is wrong. But frankly, I think in other cases, it's prosecutors not wanting they're afraid of the political consequences of this because, as you know, local DAs are elected positions.
Right.
And I think if you're like a Democratic DA and you go after Democrats who are committing fraud, your own party official is going to be mad at you. And if you go after Republicans who are committing fraud, they're going to claim you're being partisan. So I think some DAs just don't want the hassle of that, and so they avoid it, which again is a mistake, but I think that's what happened.
Everything's just gotten too political.
So here we sit in February of 2021. We have some local elections happening all over the country this year, and in 18 months we're going to have major elections across the country for Congress and the Senate and other offices. I believe I hope I sent you a list of about a dozen things that Up With America has come up with, but more important, what would you say to our listeners who are involved in this in their local level? What should they be doing? What are the changes that they need to be looking at making, Hans?
Well, first of all, we need to clean up the voter registration list so people can't vote more than once, and so that people are actually not voting at false and fraudulent addresses. And I'll give you one example that can be done at the local level very easily, but the county election officials aren't doing. And it's this. Look, what's the number one goal of county governments, right? It's collecting property taxes. right? Because that's how they fund everything.
Right.
Well, election officials, when they get a voter registration application coming in, aren't doing something as basic as checking. You know, if I'm registering as John Smith at 100 Main Street, they need to check with the county tax department to find out, well, is 100 Main Street really a residence, or is it a commercial address or a county park or something else? Moreover, what does the county tax department say is at 100 Main Street? Is it an apartment complex? Is it a single-family home? And how many other people does our registration system show are registered there? If it's a single-family home and there are 30 people registered there, that should be a red flag.
Certainly.
That there's a potential problem and there may be false registrations. That's just a simple change that a lot of places aren't doing.
Do we need to take a break, Glenn, just real
We
quick?
do. I think people should lose their houses. Then that would be the quickest way to straighten this out.
Yeah, Hans, can you stay with me for 5 more minutes?
Yep, I sure can.
Thank you, sir. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back, folks, with Hans Spakovsky. Look forward to it.
This is Liz Calloway. You're listening to Up with America on Talk 94.5.
In my mind, I'm gone to Carolina.
So, Hans, we hope you can go to Carolina soon, and I will extend you that invitation. We need to wrap this up, but it's really important, folks, that you understand that the things that Hans von Spakovsky is talking about here with the Heritage Foundation are absolutely vital so that we never go through what happened in November again. The first thing he's talking about is clean up the voter rolls. Give me the top 2 or 3, and then I want to send people to the Heritage Foundation's website and also to Up with America, where we're going to publish all of your stuff.
I tell you, the top things is you need a voter ID law, not just for in-person voting, but also for absentee balloting. A number of states have done it successfully, like Kansas and Alabama. You also need a way of cleaning up and getting people who are not U.S. citizens off the voter rolls, because right now it's very easy for aliens to register and vote and get away with it. And one way to do that, for example, is to use jury lists, because your state courts, they pull their jury lists from voter registration lists. And when somebody's excused from jury duty because they are not a U.S. citizen, most courts are not forwarding that information back to election officials so that the person can be taken off the roll, and they're not sending it to the local DA to investigate, because it's a felony under state and federal law for an alien to register and vote.
Wow. See, there's something I never even thought of. So in other words, if we can get our government entities to work together on some of these things and give them a program and a plan that says, here's what we need to be looking for, we can probably correct a lot of these mistakes.
Exactly right.
Well, listen, Hans, it's an absolute pleasure to have had you on the show this morning. Thanks for taking part of your Saturday morning to join us down here in beautiful Carolina, and we hope that you can come down and visit with us soon. I look forward to seeing one of these days. When this COVID thing is over, I'll be up visiting my friends and family in D.C., and I will look you up.
That sounds good to me. I'll buy you dinner or a drink. How's that sound?
It's a plan. Thank you, my friend. I appreciate so much that you were with us this morning and for your expertise.
Sure.
Thank you so much. Listen, folks, it's such a pleasure to have you with us again today, and I am actually honored, and I mean that sincerely, to have our next guest on this show, especially when I consider how old I'm getting. The guy you're about to hear is a well-known name in the industry, in the journalism industry, in the news business, Dean Reynolds, who I have known for ever since high school. How about that? Dean and I went to high school together, graduated together. I went off to a little college in Pennsylvania. He went off to a little college in Indiana, as I recall.
That's right.
Dean Reynolds is an old friend of mine, and what I consider to be one of the finest reporters in the business. I could go through his resume, which would be extensive and lengthy, I believe. Am I right? You were with ABC and NBC and CBS?
I was actually with UPI first, the wire service, then CNN, then ABC, then CBS, and now NewsNation.
NewsNation. And the reason I always want to talk to Dean about whatever the subject would be, because he's an expert at it. He spent many years living over in Israel covering what was going on in the Middle East. So, but just because of our friendship, I always appreciate these contacts. The bottom line, the real reason I contacted Dean this particular time, folks, is that, as you know, Up With America believes and is focused heavily on the fact that we need to have factual reporting. We need to have news that is good old-fashioned journalism. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. That's how I was taught. That's how Dean was taught. And I know every time I read anything he talks about real journalism. So if you don't mind, take a second, maybe talk about the best things about your past. And I completely forgot to mention the fact that Dean's dad, who was also a friend, he was a neighbor of ours. Dean's dad was the anchor of ABC News back in the late 1960s, Frank Reynolds. So, and now he's with, as he said, WGN America NEWSNation. Tell us a little bit about how that started and how you feel about this whole process of Americans getting factual news.
Well, let me just start by saying that anybody who is contemplating journalism must understand that journalism is a calling. It's not really a profession. It's not really a living. You know, I mean, with all due respect to people who, work in banks or hedge funds or stuff like that, those folks I see as making a living and, enjoying the fruits of their labor. Journalism is different. Journalism is a calling almost like the priesthood. You have to understand that it's a very, very demanding mistress in a sort of way. You cannot get away from it once you're in it, and you wouldn't want to leave it if you could. So the idea of objective journalism, there is no perfect objectivity. You are human beings. You observe things, and you interpret things. One of the things that I've always sort of bristled at is people saying, well, journalists all act in a pack. They all, write or interpret an event, certainly in politics, the same way. Well, to that I say that if you put 50 professionals in a room and they observe something, you should expect all of them to know what is the most important thing that happened. And they will interpret it that way. That's just the way it is. And similarly, hang on a second, the profession has changed. It's gotten a lot more partisan, I think, or opinionated.
Yep, I would certainly agree with that. Yep.
A lot of, and not to sound very old, but I'm astonished when I see reporters from the New York Times tweeting out their opinions of, a politician.
Right. Precisely.
Similarly, the Fox News bills itself as, a news channel, and there is virtually no news after, I don't know what, like 7 o'clock. Everything else is opinion heavily laced with ridicule of one side or the other. You get the same thing on MSNBC.
Correct.
The problem is, I think, judging from NewsNation's ratings initially, at least, is that the public wants that. The public wants opinion, and they like to be sort of steered in a particular direction, or at least to have their views confirmed by one source of information or another. And I think that's a big change in the industry over, the 50 years I've been in it. This idea that that you have to have somebody agree with you when you're actually you're a free thinker yourself, and you shouldn't have to seek confirmation. But that seems to be what's happening. Somebody told me the other day that one of the worst things they could hear is that somebody say, "Well, I've done my own research," and that usually means they have looked and looked and looked online until they found somebody that agrees with them, instead of getting the news from an unfiltered source, and that's problematic. I think that's why we find ourselves where we are in the country right now, so bitterly divided.
It is awful. Yeah.
And over what? Politics. Come on. I mean, I just find that to be amazing.
I could not agree with you more, my friend. I'm telling you what, I often tell people, because the way you and I were taught how to be a good reporter or how to do good journalism is who, what, when, where, why, and how, and leave the rest of it to your viewers, listeners, or readers. And I often tell people, if I'm a sailor, if I was to leave Portsmouth, Virginia, and sail to Europe, and my destination was London, and I'm off by 1 degree, I'm going to end up in Africa. And if the news is off by 1 degree, I don't know what's going on. I need to know the facts. I have, in order to make good decisions about COVID or politics or anything else, I need the facts.
Right. And the facts lately have been in dispute. Yeah. The truth is being attacked because people, don't like it, either from the left or from the right. I mean, it's not terribly healthy. And I worry about bequeathing this kind of environment to my kids, who they've grown up in this kind of, flame-throwing sort of environment. I keep coming back. I show my age, but when I just spent the last 6 months covering politics and the Trump campaign and the Biden campaign.
Yes, sir.
And there were people at NEWSNation who wanted me to cover this as if it was Adlai against Ike. Like two guys. If one lost, you didn't think it was the end of the world. Even like as recently as Romney and Obama.
Yep.
But because of the kind of individuals who were running, I kept saying, well, I have to report what the guy is saying, and what he's saying is a little strange. So,
amen. Listen, you know what, Dean? I'm loving this conversation already. What we'd like to do is take a commercial break just for a couple of minutes, if you can stay with me for 5 minutes. And I'd like to come back and talk about what the future holds for Dean Reynolds, and then what the future holds for WGN America, all right?
Okay, all right.
We'll be right back. Hold on, folks.
Across the sea, let us swear allegiance to a land that's free.
It's no surprise that Myrtle Beach has become one of America's most popular places to retire. If you're looking for an active senior lifestyle that's close to everything but away from it all, it's important that you make the right choice. Covenant Towers. Surrounded by beautiful landscaping and tucked neatly into the woods along the fairways of Pine Lakes Country Club, Covenant Towers offers the finest in carefree independent senior living and just blocks from the beach. Spacious condos combine the advantages of home ownership with one low monthly fee that covers 24-hour security, all utilities, housekeeping, elegant dining, and more. Make the right choice. Covenant Towers.
Hi, this is Jackie Carpenter with Coldwell Banker Shakur Advantage Real Estate. If you are ready for carefree, independent senior living, call me at Covenant Towers. I'd love to give you a tour. Or just visit CovenantTowers.com. Come join the lifestyle you've been waiting for. Freedom plus friendly fellowship. I'm Jackie Carpenter, Covenant Towers.
Hey, it is time for our check-in with Habitat for Humanity of Horry County. Today, the big guy, Jason Green, the Executive Director of Habitat. Jason, what's happening right now with Habitat?
So as we kicked off the new year, we are starting a monthly giving program as a way of talking with folks about smaller gifts throughout the entire course of the year, which will help us shore up some of the finances that we need to continue to build great homes for our families. Our open enrollment is getting ready to come upon us. Our applications for the homebuyer program will be available on February 15th, and the open enrollment period starts on March 1st through March 31st.
Now, for people who want to get involved in a monthly giving, let's talk about how the best way to do that is.
Go to our website, habitatmb.org, and look for our monthly giving program, or they can call our office at 843-650-8815.
Jason Green, Habitat for Humanity. Again, to get started, the website is
habitatmb.org, and our phone number is 843-650-8815.
Up with America, hosted by Tom Heron, is on now. Talk 94.5.
Dean, welcome back. We're on the phone today here doing a conversation with Dean Reynolds, an old friend of mine, longtime great journalist from multiple television media sources, and we're just thrilled that he's with us, and I've loved everything you've talked about so far, because we're all very concerned that we have to be basing our decisions on facts. Take a second, if you would, and describe to me what was the motivation behind WGN America coming up with this NEWSNation concept, of which you have been, at least at the moment, you are the national political correspondent, as I understand it.
Yeah, I am the national political correspondent for the next few hours, actually. This is actually my last day. It's not that I'm getting laid off or quitting or anything. It's just I had departed CBS in June, and I'm 72 years old, right? Like you, Tom.
Yep.
And, I'm thinking, okay, retirement, for God's sake. I've been at this 49 years, and here comes WGN America on LinkedIn, a person who I worked with very sort of peripherally at CBS years ago, looks me up on LinkedIn and suggests that I, get together with them because they're building this new station. Well, first off, I almost never go to LinkedIn because I've never really looked for a job. I've always been employed, and I wasn't looking for a job. In fact, at the time, I was thinking about, well, maybe I'll teach at DePaul or something, or Northwestern, something like that. And here comes this. So what they are attempting to do at NEWSNation is trying to be right down the middle without a lot of opinion. And they're pretty, shall I say, religious about it. You don't want to inject your views. I grew up with a wire service where you didn't inject your views anyway. There's a little governor in every journalist's head that says this far and no farther, or this, it would be a cheap shot, or, whatever. Or I'm pulling my punch here. This guy, really deserves to, for me to point out this or X, right?
Yep.
I think it's definitely at NEWSNation, which, by the way, they're going to rebrand the whole network as NEWSNation and drop the WGN America.
Good move. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a work in progress. They need to do a lot more marketing. They need to make people aware that they're even there. I mean, the ratings have not been encouraging, and they've brought in some people, to try to, I think, make, market it.
Sure.
And get it out there. Whether there is room for another, they want to expand too. There's talk of a morning show, and they're already expanding into the evening. So I think the idea is to create another 24-hour news network, based on the idea that they're not going to have a lot of bloviating during prime time from people with an axe to grind. Well, we'll see if that works. I don't know.
I can tell you this, Dean. I know I will do everything I can with our organization called Up With America and with this little radio show, which is expanding across the country, to promote that kind of thing. My favorite line of this entire interview, when you said, good journalists have a little governor in all of us, isn't that the truth? I hope they all do. I hope they all have that. I would only hope and wish that we had more tremendous reporters and journalists like Dean Reynolds. I mean that.
It's just, you do the work. And if you do the work well, you'll be successful.
Well, listen, Dean, thank you for being with us from icy, wintry Chicago, Illinois, one of my favorite cities in the world. Lived there a couple of years. Have a fantastic day. I'm going to keep in touch with you, find out what you're up to, so maybe we can get together next time I'm out your way. Or you might love Myrtle Beach. Come on down. Remember when you were here back in I want to say that you were covering George W. Bush, as I recall. I think
was.
That's the last time I saw you.
I think I've also done hurricanes over that way, too.
You probably have. All right. Listen, again, thank you so much, Dean. I appreciate you calling in today. Let me say something, but where else are you going to get that? In my opinion, this is not only the only local show where you get this kind of expertise from around the world, but I think it's the only national show that you get it. If you're not here in Myrtle Beach and you just heard two of the most brilliant minds in their particular fields, all on Up With America Radio here on Saturday morning. Tell your friends and tell your folks about it. It's important that we keep on expanding our listener base. And be sure to go to upwithamerica.org and sign up to get our weekly newsletter. Join us if you can. It's worth your while. A lot of the information we talk about here, everything we talk about here is there. And one thing you will never hear from Tom Herron. You heard Dean Reynolds talk about this. He said a word that I hate, but I believe it's so true, bloviate. What we have right now on 24/7 on every station all over America is some radio talk show guys that bloviate, that think they know everything, and they don't know anything. So the bottom line is, tune in every Saturday morning at 9 o'clock here on WTKN Talk Radio 94.5, and we'll keep it coming for folks. Call the station, let us know what you'd like to hear about, and we'll be back with you next week. We look forward to it.
Dark and dusty, painted on the sky, misty taste of moon.
I'm guessing you don't get too excited about having to clean your house. I mean, who does? Well, we do. Hi, this is Karina from the Cleanup Club. The Cleanup Club is all about cleaning your home, your business. Our staff is professional, efficient, and we're really friendly too. Get a quote for your home, business,